Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Sean Blackburn with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Luc Benyon. He is the head of marketing at Video Intelligence AG. Luc, how are you doing today?
Hi, yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and coming to us from Zurich. I'm excited to be talking about creative use of content that ticks the sales and brand boxes. But before we jump into that, if you could tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background and what it is that you guys do over at Video Intelligence AG.
Sure. So, I'm the head of marketing here at Video Intelligence. I've been here just over 2 years, and we're based in Switzerland, in Zurich in Switzerland, with offices around the world, including the US, the UK, and the Nordic regions as well. We have what's called a contextual video player. So it's a tool for web publishers. They would embed it on their page. It runs an analysis of their page and then delivers automatically video content that matches that page. So it's contextually matched video content for web publishers. So yeah, that's what we do. Before coming here, I was at a place called D&AD. And that's a creative industries sort of awards show and educational charity based in London. And I spent about 5 years there sort of heading up the content team. So at Video Intelligence, I've been trying to marry that content and creativity side of things with the ad tech world. And that's what we can talk about.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And today we're going to be talking about creating content that is applicable and useful for the sales teams and the brand itself. Why is that important overall, would you say? Something that you're passionate about speaking about?
Well, look, I think with content, the thing with content is it can be very resource heavy to produce. So the more that you can make the most of it, the more that you're going to benefit from what you have produced. And you're going to keep your budget lines in order. You're going to keep your CEO happy as well if you can demonstrate efficiencies in content. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times people will produce something and they'll think it's done once they've put it. You produce a white paper, do some tweets, maybe some paid social, get some leads, and then it's done. Whereas I think we need to think a lot more about how we can really milk that and what's inherent within that content that can be used in different times and places and by different people in the organization. So it's quite often seen that there's a delineation between the sales team and sales collateral and the sort of more brand marketing-led materials. But I found that you can reach a sweet spot in between that creates things that are interesting and that are appealing to sort of the top of the funnel. But also, if you put the right spin on it or relate it to the product well enough, can really empower the sales team as well. And it's as much about the content itself, but also about how they use it. And of course, I think a key thing in there is a good relationship between marketing and sales.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a key one. And, linking that content to the core message of a brand is something that's important. What's been your experience, some of the common pitfalls that you've seen brands make that mistake?
Yeah, so I think I like to think of it sort of like a set of filters, if you like. So what you need to do is set yourself some quite rigid filters that you run everything through. So those can be quite conceptual. So from our perspective, we'll look at context, we'll look at user experience, we'll look at automation, all of which relate to our product, but all of which give enough scope to have some quite interesting conversations. And then those filters, you can also set them to be more stylistic. So you might want, for example, everything you say to be funny, or everything you say to be technical, depending on your brand tone of voice. And that can work for aesthetics as well. So everything should be clear, or everything should be, surprising, or cartoonish, or photographic. It's an extension of your brand aesthetic pushed towards the content as well. And I think you really need to think about those filters every time you do a tweet, or every time you have an event, or every time you post something. Every sales slide needs to be referred back to those filters and think, does this really relate to what we talk about? And then you get this amazing consistency almost effortlessly if you do that.
Yeah, it's an identity. Even the content itself becomes part of the brand itself. There's some synchronicity there.
Yeah, and I think we're living in a world now where there's so many content channels, and we're producing so much stuff that those old frameworks for brand identity don't really extend out to that. And so we need to, as marketers, really be the guardians of how brand identity extends to the written word, or to events, or to sales materials. And just making sure that we even if it's writing those filters in large letters on the wall, or sticking them in front of you at your desk, it's just making sure they're always front of mind.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, before we started recording, about some activations that you guys have done, that have kind of gone through this filtering process. What's some of those examples that you have for people of, this process that you're mentioning?
So, when I first came here, I'd come from the creative industries, and I found that a lot of the advertising technology sector was quite narrowly focused, and people were talking about quite dry topics, mergers and acquisitions, or ad fraud, and things like this, which are super important to the industry, but they're not going to attract an audience. And so I decided to strip things back and look at the products that we had, and take a couple of concepts and apply those in an event scenario. So the first one we did was at Cannes Lions, which is a big advertising festival in the south of France. Anyone who's been knows that having an activation there can cost you, hundreds of thousands is the lower end of what it costs to do things at Cannes. You have to rent a beach or a yacht really to get cut through. But we decided to sort of go fringe, and we just went down and approached a local creperie, literally a crepe shop, and said to them, hey, can we take over your cafe for the week? We'll put some branding up. We'll buy all the crepes that you would sell in a week, which, for a small cafe in a town in France is in the low thousands. And we'll use it as our base. And what we then did was used our product at the time, which was a sort of interactive mobile advertising unit. And we used that product to attract people down to this creperie, to target them with using location targeting, which was another function we had. And that created a whole load of press and PR collateral that we were able to capitalize on the buzz around the Cannes Lion event, whilst also demonstrating our product, and at the same time having a really cool, location for our sales guys to have meetings, and a story for them to tell. They've already got an in with people. Hey, come down and have a free crepe on us, and then let's talk about business. And the concept of how we got the people there linked straight through to what our product was. So that was a cool one we did. And then we did a similar thing at a trade show called DMexco, which is a big digital marketing and advertising show. And there we were really focused on connecting advertisers to publishers. So we used a lot of the floor space in our stand to create an escape room. And the concept in this escape room was you had to create a connection to escape the room. And it took 10 minutes or 15 minutes. We invited people to come along. Obviously, then that's a lead generation opportunity because you're taking people's details to register them. But they come along, they have a really fun experience, but they're also conceptually doing what your product does. So then you're able to have this conversation with them about how what they just did relates to your product. And it's, you're in a more relaxed environment then, but you've also demonstrated really tangibly what the product does. And of course, you can see from a social media and blogging perspective, all the different angles that gives you then to talk about, and the different modes of collateral, photographs, videos, and so on that you can create around that.
Absolutely. And that's kind of, a hero piece of content like we were also talking about before we started recording. And I really like that concept. And it's something that we utilize here at Sweetfish. How is it that you guys approach creating whether that's a piece of content or, even with activations like this, an experience that really, churns out and gives you the ability to take a lot of angles like you had mentioned?
Yeah, so I think, those events are great, but they're sort of peaks throughout the year. But I think it's important to have something that you can talk about constantly and consistently throughout the year as well. So, I like to think of how you can take the product points and run them through those filters. And out of that, you get what creates something quite intelligent and quite interesting. We're called video intelligence. So one thing I wanted to do was make intelligent content here. So I looked at what people in the industry were doing, and it struck me that no one was really taking a sort of cerebral approach to the different marketing and advertising technologies that were out there. So we took the concept of context, and we got in touch with a series of academics, so a neuroscientist, a behavioral psychologist, a linguist, and we basically made film interviews with them. And so we created some sort of 3-minute films with these guys, which was super cool. And we did it really nicely with an agency called Common Industry, who was really helpful in that. But that was really just the start. From the video, of course, you can then make some social clips and so on. But we also overlaid animations onto them to give them a bit of identity and a bit of a creative spin. And then you've got those animations. You've also got the content about what the people are talking about. And it's then down to you to be really creative with how you link that across the spectrum of your marketing output. So, for example, in PR, how does the things that those people have talked about relate to the topics that are going on in the industry at that time? Pitch that out to the industry press. Get in touch with them, say, hey, I've got a really interesting person here talking about context, and it relates to this industry topic. And the industry press are going to be really up for that, because you're playing into their narrative, but you're bringing a new angle to it. And of course, you can promote your video on the side of it, but really it's about milking the content in that video. You can do the same for events. So you get in touch with an event and say, hey, look, we can do a panel session on using really intelligent people talking about this concept in new ways that you haven't heard before. And then you basically take the content from those videos and present it at an event. Of course, you can do blogs then as well. And from your blog, you can spin that off into your social media assets. That's the sort of simple, obvious stuff. And you've got to be populating your social feeds. You've got to have that sales funnel working, and build the sales funnel. But making sure that hero content spreads all the way down the funnel is what's important. So when it gets to the sales team, for example, how are they going to benefit from this? Well, you might have someone who's talking in quite a lot of detail about a product need, for example. And sales often, they'll talk about the product, but they also need to convince someone that they need your product.
Of course.
So you can relate what this person's talking about to the product need. Make a slide for the sales guys about that. Make an animated GIF if you like. Make it quite dynamic so that you can throw some interesting pieces there into the sales material. And of course, case studies and research are super powerful bits of content when it comes to the sales team. So giving them that material that they can use is really important. So the sales team have got a job on their hands, right? So it's B2B. They need a good pipeline. And of course, the way we all know to build a pipeline is lead generation tools. So what we did from all that PR content we'd done, I pulled it then together and created a printed booklet at the end of last year. And this was basically a series of articles that had been in the press written by us. So I extracted those, pulled out the core elements, put those into 6 key concepts and called it Trends for 2019. Designed it super nicely as well. And if you've got an in-house designer or you've got a design studio on retainer, they're going to love you if you give them an editorial job to say, make a little magazine. It might not actually be that expensive to do. It's surprisingly cheap, and you can print those off, and you might be looking at a cost under $10, under $5 per unit. And we, instead of a Christmas card, we posted that out to loads of our leads, warm leads, cold leads, and so on. And they're getting something dropped on their desk, which in the digital sector is quite unusual. And of course, it then gives the sales guys, and this is crucial, it gives the sales guys a reason to get back in touch.
Yep.
So often that sales team are chasing and chasing. Have you looked at the proposal? Do you want to do a test? Have you seen our product? But what can be the most powerful sales message is an email saying, hey, we've just published this report on these really interesting topics. I thought it might be up your street. That's all. See you later.
Right.
And people are super surprised when they get a message that doesn't try to sell them something, that just says, here's something interesting that you might like. Right. And of course, then hopefully that turns into a conversation which they can turn into that sales opportunity eventually. And of course, the content in there, it might be quite conceptual, but it's all, because you've run it through your filters, it all relates back to the product eventually, and it all gives them reasons to have conversations and have interesting conversations with people. And in B2B, being able to have an interesting conversation with someone, I think, is just as powerful as being able to have a really fruitful conversation. So I guess that's sort of how you build this hero content, and then use it in all those different ways and spread it out across the sales and marketing teams. Yeah.
When this is a fantastic concept, and I think that this is, like you said, a really good framework to think about how to create some content that is actually ticking sales objectives, ticking brand objectives. Did you come to this? Did someone teach you this, or was this something, a struggle that you had learned, or was this something that you had just observed out in the marketplace that this wasn't happening with other brands?
Well, I think it's a lot of people follow industry sort of perceived wisdom and do things as everybody else is doing. And I looked around in the ad tech sector, and I saw this very dry stuff people were coming out with. They're paying a lot of money to collaborate with media and to publish with some of the big press. Can cost in the tens of thousands of dollars for a white paper or something, and you benefit, of course, from their reach. But I wanted to do things more economically. And I also wanted to bring some of the creative background I had. So if we rewind 7 or 8 years ago, I was working at this place, D&AD, and this was the Creative Industries Awards show. And I was in the content department there. And back then, 7 or 8 years ago, the content department was not in the marketing department. In fact, it was a separate floor from the marketing department. And it was crazy that it even existed in retrospect, because it served no bottom line goal. This was literally just a cost center with no ROI, no KPIs. It was just make interesting content, tell the story. Gradually, over the 5 years I was there, we linked that up to marketing. We started adding things like call to action buttons to our content, which, believe it or not, we didn't have back then. Right. But because we were so liberated there to just create interesting content, we had to go out and find people in the creative industries and just create great stuff. And we learned what worked. And this was across a broad spectrum of disciplines. So I'd be speaking to product designers, advertisers, photographers, illustrators, all within the space of one day, and trying to bounce between the two, but all those different disciplines, and tell interesting, insightful stories about all those different things simultaneously. So we had to learn pretty quickly how to interview someone, how to create something that went down well online, and what formats really worked. But this was a charity as well. So we had almost no budget. We had in-house design, and we had in-house videographer. So I knew that creating video content was a really powerful way to create a hero piece, but also because everything that's said in a video is potentially a written word as well, and people know to transcribe their interviews, of course. But also then the PR aspect comes in, because you have to think, how do I make this interesting to the press? And you have to think a little bit like a journalist. What's the story the journalist wants to tell? and then spin whatever you've created and push it to the journalist by tying it into the stories that they're trying to tell. And I learned that by working very closely with the PR guy there, who was in-house as well. And we just bounced ideas back and forth. So I think it's a combination of that background in creating pure content alongside having fairly limited resource to do things, not being able to compete with some of the industry heavyweights, creates that concept that you can really milk your hero assets in all those different scenarios.
Right. Yeah. Necessity is the mother of all invention, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, one of the things it's worth saying is that you got to have the sales team engaged, and by getting them to see the benefit of doing something like interviewing academics or case studies, and really getting your sales guys to help you get those case studies in and ask interesting questions of your clients in the case studies, can really be helpful as well. So sales and marketing need to be working on the same page together, need to be creating content together. You can also interview your sales team and ask them, what did you learn from that interview, from that sales pitch that you had? What are the real pain points with the people that you're talking to on a daily basis? What are the barriers we're coming up against? And think how you can creatively turn that into something, whether it's an article for the press, whether it's a panel session for an event, or whether it's just a tweet or a little animation or, a blog post. The sales team are a massive resource as well. And I think marketers really have to work closely with them.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really love the teamwork that you guys have at Video Intelligence on this, and the way that you guys are thinking about how to create content that ticks the sales and brand boxes. If anybody's listening and has any follow-up questions and would like to connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
So I'm Luc Benyon on LinkedIn. I think it's probably the easiest place to be, every B2B marketer's favorite hangout. So you can follow me on Twitter at Hanbury Street as well.
Very great. Well, Luc, thanks again for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.